So good evening, everyone, and welcome to our discussion panel. As most of you are aware, we are here to talk about suicide prevention, specifically in connection to the show 13 Reasons Why on Netflix. For those of you who don't know, the show follows Clay Jensen as he attempts to understand his friend Hannah Baker's suicide. Hannah has left a series of 13 tapes that detail the reasons why she ended her life, and the show has become controversial for its graphic depiction of suicide and rape, as well as how it addresses mental health challenges. So today we have a panel of experts that can answer some of our questions about the show and how to prevent suicide. Rob Harrison is an MD at Westerly Hospital. He has over 40 years of experience working in the field and specializing in the emergency room. He is also a certified trainer for Youth Mental Health First Aid, a program that was founded in Australia and has been adopted throughout the world. Lacey Johnson is the Director of Programs with Creative Potential LLC, a company that supports families through integrative therapeutic services. She has extensive experience in athletic counseling, substance abuse rehabilitation, crisis intervention, counseling psychology, and more. She has experience in working with tweens, teens, and emerging adults of all ability levels. And finally, we have Michael McGovern. He is the Senior Clinician for Emergency Mobile Psychiatric Services at United Family and Community Services, also known as EMPS. They provide services for children and adolescents who are experiencing a behavioral or mental health crisis that you can access by calling 211. The program has nearly 150 trained mental health professionals across the state that can respond immediately by phone or face-to-face within 45 minutes when a child is experiencing an emotional or behavioral crisis. Our first question is for those of you who have watched the show. Please tell us your thoughts on it.
Well, I didn't want to finish watching it after I started, but I kind of felt like I had to because I moderated another similar panel at Westerly about 2 weeks ago. I guess to me, the real positive parts of the show were that it portrayed, I think it could help parents to understand what life is really like in the high school these days. I don't think most parents have a clue as to how brutal it is. So that was the best, one of the few really good things I thought about it. Okay, I don't want to take up a lot of time, but there were some of the negative things where I was concerned because it never presented anything about mental illness, and 90% of all people who complete suicide have a diagnosable mental illness. They never talked about it that way. The way she behaved in her planning was very cold and calculated, and that's not typical at all of people who are suicidal. Most suicidal people of any age are confused and searching and lonely and having all kinds of problems, but they don't generally have that kind of a vengeance plan in place. So the only other thing that I was concerned about, a lot of things I was concerned about. I was concerned about how graphic the rape and other things were portrayed. I would think a book would be a much better way to learn about that kind of stuff in many ways. I was also concerned that they never really addressed the effects of substance abuse. Although there was a lot of substance abuse portrayed, they never really talked about it or made any effort to talk about how that affected what else happened in the movie. So those were the main thoughts I had about it.
Thank you.
I haven't seen it, to be honest with you, so I couldn't. I understand
That's okay.
the violence.
I was really struck immediately by the concept for how it kind of it set up a model for teens and tweens to see, a means of seeking a way out that was a really ugly thing in reality, and it kind of glorified it in a way. And I was very concerned about all the teens out there that would be picking up on this model, whether or not they wanted to. And I was really struck by how much the characters were changed from the book to the show. How there was a lot of representation of deeper characters, from what I understand, than was in the book. And I think there was a lot of, at the same time, unidimensional portrayals. I was really disturbed by the school, that nobody was actually taking a appropriate course of action in a way that would be within the bounds of what is acceptable in any school around here.
Absolutely. I have to say I agree on the school one simply because your first resource as a teenager is going to be the school.
Mm-hmm.
And putting it out there that it's not a safe place to turn to, it's not a good idea. So for those of you who aren't aware, suicide is the second most common cause of death among teens. And I'm just curious what you guys' thoughts on how a show like this is going to impact our teen viewers. Specifically, we all know that they're still developing, especially in their prefrontal cortex. So how is this impacting, especially some of our younger ones? I know kids as young as 12 have started watching the show. So.
You start.
Thank you. Well, I want to say in my experience that I've even seen a youngster as young as 8 talk to me about it before, and this is months ago, before I even had any concept what the show was. He was telling me about, when I asked him, have you actually thought of ways to harm or even kill yourself? And he said, yeah, like cutting myself. And he said, like in the 13 Reasons, and I didn't know what it was at that time, and that got me thinking about it. In this spring, I will say, in the last 6 weeks in particular, when I asked the question, have you seen that program? Have you seen the 13? Every one of them has said yes. And I, like I said, I don't want to seem hypocritical because I haven't seen the show, but it does seem as though the students and the kids telling me about it portray it almost as this heroic act,
Right.
Almost like a heroine in the story, which really concerns me because there is a certain segment of these kids who do have real mental illness, have had a great deal of trauma in their life, have had prior suicide attempts, and something like this, is kind of that tipping point. So it's been very prevalent this spring. The numbers for us are always greater in the spring anyway in terms of call volume. We see a much higher call volume in terms of kids who are expressing suicidal ideation, as well as just the level of severity of the kids. A lot more self-injurious behavior as well this time of year. And that's consistent from year to year to year in the spring.
It's funny, we were talking about that before you got here. Yeah, I was definitely concerned because, like I said, I work with a lot of teens and tweens, and many of them already battle suicidal tendencies in various ways. But, to hear that at various schools they're going around going, oh, there's your tape. They're using the language of the show to kind of set that precedent in such a way. I was very concerned about it because we do know that suicide does have a contagion quality to it, because the likelihood increases once we know somebody who has done that. So I was really concerned about the effect. Now, on the other hand, I've had a lot of, and in fact Jessica's been present, I've had a lot of conversations with kids, with teens and tweens about the program. It's been a really great place to start discussions about suicide and about how things are glorified, and also what it's like, to feel hopeless, but also to seek out resources instead, but really to kind of open the door instead of close it. And my concern is that those conversations aren't happening everywhere, that those conversations are not happening in every household, and that there's a lot of people, a lot of teens and tweens with, like you said, developing prefrontal cortex, where they're just going to the next episode, and in their mind, that's a valid perspective to consider, is that they should go ahead and just do it very suddenly and leave everybody with an awful, awful burden. And that really struck me as well, as what a cruel and awful thing to do, and really that struck me as well. It just and this era, as I say frequently, I think this is by far the hardest time to grow up ever. There's so much information coming at teens and tweens all the time, so much more than even 10 years ago. So much marketing, so much perfection in their faces, and so many messages that it's very hard for them to be able to process out what they should really be taking with them into their adulthood.
I don't know numbers if there's been a dramatic increase in suicide since the series came out. I do know that about 3 months ago, New York Times put out an article saying that for the first time in history, 10 to 14-year-olds have the same chance of dying from suicide as they do from car accidents. It's never been true before. I also, last week, got a call from a local middle school asking me to come to speak to their parents because they've had a real spike in suicide attempts in middle school in the last 6 months or so. So I can't say it's a direct result of that series, but it certainly could be. As they've expressed, suicidality is somewhat contagious. And young people especially don't have a great concept of time. They don't realize that if they break up with a girlfriend, in 4 months, 6 months, or a year, they may not even remember much about it. Their concept is that time ends, next week or the week after, and if they see no hope for that short period of time, then it's very difficult for them to understand or have a concept of other options. And that's what we're talking about is trying to get people who are, suicide ideation is really fairly common. Statistics indicate that about 1 in every 20 people in this country every day is having some suicidal thought. Obviously, nowhere near that number act on it, even attempt it. But they need to understand that having suicidal thoughts is not that abnormal, it's not that unusual, but that doesn't certainly mean you have to act on it. And that was the thing I was concerned about the movie also, or the series, that it seemed like that's the only option you had. You didn't really have much else to do. So yeah, I'm quite concerned. This end of school is always a difficult time, I think, for young people, whether they're seniors going to college or just wondering what's going to happen during the summer. There's so much uncertainty in so many young people's lives these days, and so much anxiety. The average age of onset, the median age of onset of anxiety used to be about 11 or 12, and the latest studies indicate it's as young as 7 now. That half of all people who have anxiety indicate that's when it started for them, is age 7. So, in fact, that and 3 or 4 other major mental health challenges or the ages have become much younger in the last, from the studies that just came out about 6 months ago. So it's affecting our young people much more than it ever has before.
Thank you. So all 3 of you have mentioned various studies documenting the changes in youth and their mental health. And so many of the viewers of the show have also been able to identify signs that Hannah was thinking about killing herself, and ultimately she did go through with it. So I was wondering if you guys could elaborate on what are some of the possible signs that parents or teens might recognize in their friends and their children and their family members.
Well, there's the standard answers for that. If somebody's divesting themselves of their roles in life, if they are stepping back from all the things that they're interested in, if they're giving away different things, if they are, at some time, I feel kind of funny about answering this because so much is dependent on the individual, because some people will become very quiet. Some people will talk a lot more. They'll be more peaceful as they get closer to it. It also depends upon, there are so many facets to mental health and where we are in our own stability that what it looks like in this zebra would look very different in his suit. So I'm kind of shy about giving real answers of that nature, but if you get to a place where they are kind of not trying anymore, not engaging, or engaging a lot, those tend to be some responses. But as Michael and I were talking, because we work together without knowing each other a lot, we work with a lot of the same families who are in crisis, and I'm sure that actually he could give some very good answers as to what.
I'll try. I should have done this from the offset in the case that you people think rude of me. If you do see me at some point reach for my phone, I do apologize. Just I'm on call for work, and if I get a call from someone saying, my son or daughter's currently suicidal and need to respond, that's what I'm doing. I'm not checking to see if my wife is going. It's nothing like that. It's I need to respond. But with regard to the question posed, there's the classic acronym, and it is person dependent, but one of the classic acronyms we have is called Is Path Warm, and each letter standing for one of those symptoms that suicidal behaviors are possible or on the horizon, and I'll go through it very quickly. The I in IS stands for ideation. The vast majority of people who have active ideation, and I'll make that distinction in a minute, who have active ideation tell somebody. In the 30 days prior, they usually tell someone. They might even say it in passing, just say, maybe I should just end it. And the part of the problem with this is a lot of the people they are with are not professionals and don't know how to handle that news. Maybe they don't want to handle it, and they'll say, well, you don't mean that, and shut up, things will get better, and the person kind of pipes down and doesn't expand on that. There's something called passive suicidal ideation. Passive ideation is something that a great deal of people, I think if they're honest, will say they've encountered at some point in their life, and what that means is you think about not existing kind of in a passive tense, like I wish I could just disappear. I wish I was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer and they told me I got a week to live and I could just be done with it all. I wish a meteor would hit the earth and I could be vaporized. That's much different from active ideation, where I don't want to exist and I got 100 pills. I have a bunch of melatonin plus other painkillers which I want to combine, and you know what? Maybe tomorrow night, mom's working late, and you can see it's a very concrete plan. But to move on to some of the other signs, the S stands for substance use. When someone is, of course, using substances, alcohol especially has disinhibiting properties. So a lot of times, remember, when you're contemplating suicide, you have to push down no matter how depressed you are, you still have to push down every reflex you have as a human being to survive. Mm-hmm. Of the few people who've jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge who've survived, it's been very few. Each one of them has said, when I took that kind of last step, that point of no return, the thought in my mind was, oh God, no. No. So that does kick in. But substances, especially alcohol, can make you kind of give you the courage to do things that otherwise you would generally not do. Path, and I'll go through these pretty quickly. Path is P, purposelessness, feeling as if you have no purpose on this planet. There's no purpose for my existence. A, anxiety, we mentioned that before. T, feeling trapped, feeling as though you were in a situation that will never end. The human brain just referenced a breakup. A breakup at 13, you don't have the ability, unfortunately, the human mind feels as though when we're encountering emotion, I cannot perceive, when you're trapped in that emotion, I cannot perceive a day that I will feel different. No matter what it is, we will, but we're unable to contemplate that day when we're in that emotional state at that time. Trapped, H, of course, hopelessness. If that person is experiencing to you that things are never going to get better, I could change medications, I could change therapists, it won't matter, I'll still be me, I'll still be this loser, I'll still, and warm, of course. Feelings of worthlessness. A, agitation or a great deal of anger you see. R, recklessness, behaving very recklessly. And M, those refer to alterations or changes in the mood of the person. So is path warm, if you Google that or look it up, is kind of the consensus. Those are kind of warning signs that you could see depending on the person. But the one I like, again, what I like to go to, the person will generally tell someone. They will tell someone. A lot of days now, they might tell people making a kind of a veiled reference on social media, especially when we're talking about middle schoolers or high schoolers.
So I think they've pretty well covered most of the signs that I could think of. Also, I think the next thought that comes to my mind is, okay, what do you do with it when you see those signs, or you recognize that something is really off, and the most difficult thing for most people to do is to ask that question, to say, are you thinking of killing yourself? Mm-hmm. Are you thinking of suicide? Don't say, are you thinking of hurting yourself? Because most people say, no, I don't want to feel pain, I don't want to hurt. But the majority of people will answer yes if they are thinking of suicide. And as you mentioned, there's one young man named Kevin Hines who did jump off the Golden Gate Bridge and survived. And he said, the minute my hands and feet left the rail, I said, what have I done? God save me, I don't want to die. You know? And he didn't die, but he went through a very difficult long time recovery because he shattered 3 vertebrae in his back when he hit feet first, and had to deal with that. But the point was his father had realized something was going on with him that day and said, why don't you come stay with me at the office? We'll go to a ball game, we'll go to a movie, we'll do whatever you want to do. He said, no, Dad, I've got something really important to do. He had already become very calm and decided that was what he was going to do. And that can be a very strong danger point when there's a sudden, and someone who's been very anxious and all of a sudden now they're very calm and very peaceful about things. They have decided this is going to be the solution for them, the irreversible solution, unfortunately. But his dad, he said, if my dad had asked the question at least twice, I know I would have told him. If he had asked me, are you thinking of suicide? I would have told him. But he didn't ask that question, no fault of his own. He was not a counselor. But to me, one of the positive things of all this stuff is that we can all learn. Any citizen, I think, can learn to recognize the signs of suicide, and any citizen can learn to ask that question and then get help for people. I'm sure we'll talk about some other options.
That's actually a really, really good transition into my next question. So if we've asked that question and we've asked, are you thinking of killing yourself or of committing suicide? And they say yes. What, as someone who's not a professional, who doesn't work with youth in this way, what would you advise us to do? Where should we turn for the support for this person?
Well, it would depend on the person you're speaking to. If you're speaking to an adult, obviously you want that adult to then tell that person's parents and kind of formulate a game plan moving forward to talk to a professional. And it would depend on what the suicidal ideation entailed. It would, if it was passive, if there was an active plan, but that should be, that should really be looked at by a professional. A lot of times, thankfully, I'll see people in middle school and high school, that person will make a comment to someone, they will then approach school guidance. That happens a great deal of time. So go to the school social worker, school psychologist, guidance person if you were in the school setting. Outside, access people who are around that person. Because remember, people kind of have mixed emotions. You want to maintain confidentiality, such as we do in that setting, but with the exception of that, if that person is placing themselves at imminent risk, which they are when they're saying that.
So I have a follow-up question
Yep.
for you. So with the services that your group provides, how exactly would someone get in contact with you? Is it only through school, correct, like introduction? Like how do they
Well, I would
reach
say
you?
I think 2/3 of our calls come through schools, but anyone can access us. So even kids can access us. We serve 1 to 18, still 1 to 19, still in high school. All you have to do is dial 211, hit 1, because immediately what will happen is they'll say, if you were experiencing a psychiatric behavioral health crisis, please dial 1, do that. They'll connect you to a call specialist. At that time, we'll triage the information, then connect you to one of us. And you can either talk to us over the phone or hopefully let us come out to either the school or the home to talk to you in person, because there's something that's a little lost if you're not doing that face-to-face,
Yeah. Actually, that's what I was going to say, is that 211 is a great resource. I think that with our teens and tweens, when they are expressing and experiencing like these feelings, these really intense emotions, they'll say like, I just want to kill myself. There's a lot of different kind of things that kids will say at different times. And I think the number one thing I wanted to make sure that I conveyed is that the number one thing that any of us can do is not flinch, is not pull away and not go, uh-oh, this is serious. Because at the end of the day, feeling suicidal has a lot more to do with feeling like you have no options and you're trapped and that you can't handle the burdens. It's actually a fairly normal response when there's so much pressure on a situation that, frequently people talk to both of us a lot about, suicide, and that somebody talking about suicide with you is a much, much better thing than not. 10 times out of 10, it is better if there's a conversation and that you are there and present with them and trying to understand where they're at, because it's not that they are suddenly a three-headed monster that's going to explode. To be able to stay present with them and say, how can I help you? And not to expect them to give you good answers or to be happy about it. Because, if it were that simple, they probably wouldn't be having the thoughts that they're having.
I agree certainly that it depends on the individual and the individual circumstances. Every single circumstance is different. Every single person is different. And so the action you take, I think, has to be tailored to that. I am an instructor for something called Youth Mental Health First Aid, which is designed to teach any adult, particularly ones who work with young people, how to recognize the signs of the most 7 common mental illnesses and to be able to intervene with an action plan. I'm also an instructor for something called QPR, which is suicide intervention. That's only a 2-hour class. But in both of those classes, when I'm instructing, I have to be very mindful of the audience that I'm speaking to. If it's, for example, in Westerly, we're teaching every single school personnel in the Westerly School District. That's almost 600 people. So far we've taught almost 200 of them, youth mental health first aid. But I always emphasize we all have dual roles. When you're in school, then you have school policies and procedures that you follow. But we're also parents, neighbors, friends, relatives of young people who are having problems. Roughly 22% of all young people ages 12 to 18 have a diagnosable mental health problem any given time. That's 1 out of every 4 or 5. So we're talking about a lot of young people having, not just somebody say, I think they've got a problem. These are diagnosable mental health problems. So it's a huge crisis, really, that we're facing. But we all can do it. We all can, and I think the only real long-range hope for our young people is the adult population. Will there ever be enough mental health providers? Probably not. Will there ever be enough that schools can do to solve the problem? I don't think so. Will there ever be enough that an individual parent can necessarily do? I think it takes the old saying, it takes a village, but I think we need a network, a safety network. And some people have estimated that if 1 in every 10 adults were trained in youth mental health first aid, we would have an adequate safety network to recognize and be able to intervene. So.
It's kind of funny you're answering my next question before I even get to ask it. This is a bit of a trend. So apart from working with individuals who are at risk of suicide, what else can we do to prevent suicide? So you're talking about the youth mental health first aid and building that network really does answer that. But does anybody have anything else they want to add to that about what else we can do beyond working one-on-one with people?
I think it's actually why I do what I do. So the thing is that prevention overall, it's kind of like, DARE is actually shown to be very ineffective for combating substance abuse. They've known that for 20 years. And at the end of the day, when we talk about trying to prevent suicide, what we really need is to develop emotional competency, to develop, different dimensions to our identity. So there's community involvement, getting engaged in volunteering, in sports, activities, places where we can engage our desires with skill building and competency. These places allow for us to develop our own abilities so that we can live in the community and feel supported. So we know that social support is one of the primary preventative factors. We know that education and the ability to communicate about our emotions verbally, these are the things that have a preventative effect on, teen suicide, teen pregnancy, gang involvement, and I was involved in Springfield, Massachusetts, with a lot of the efforts to combat epidemics of these varieties. But at the end of the day, it really is about kind of doing actually what our moderator does, which is build a teen room, you know, at the library where the kids have a place to go and a place to be together and opportunities to have discussions where, you know, you can feel like even if I just had that breakup, at least I have my friends, at least I have soccer, at least I have these different things that can hold me up and allow for me to feel like there's a reason for me to continue onward. And I think that's a really important place for us as a community to grow.
Yeah, and when we talk about adults with problems, mental health problems and substance abuse problems, we talk about recovery. With young people, we talk about building resilience, being able to bounce back when something bad has happened to them. And there are a number of things that parents and adults in general can do to build resilience in young people. Some studies have shown that it only takes, many times, only one really important relationship between a young person and an adult to make all the difference in the world in their life. If they have one person that they can really talk to, that's a huge protective factor, the biggest one probably of all. And it's kind of shocking that there's so many young people who don't have even one relationship with an adult. So that's what, and what we're really talking about here is giving of yourself.
Yeah.
You know, you're talking about being willing to open yourself up and try to give of yourself to a young person, to another person, no matter what the age is. There are ways to do that that can be extremely helpful, but you've got to be willing to do it to start with. So, and I think I recently had a, well, no, I'm just going with that. But.
Do you have anything to add?
Well, I would certainly like to echo those sentiments. Having more people engage in pro-social activities is always going to be. Relationship building is obviously huge as well. I think, especially in the sense that, you know, people who are considering suicide feel one of the key things, they feel alone in the world, which is different from loneliness. They feel as though they are alone, completely isolated by themselves, so a relationship can be huge. The one thing I would add to my partners here would be probably just more discussions like this, more efforts on schools to have Suicide Awareness Month to just destigmatize this. A lot of people don't talk about it due to the fact that they feel as though they will be perceived as crazy or it's a taboo subject. So breaking those walls down is continued struggle, but I think a worthy one certainly, and just to continue that day in and day out.
So that actually leads in really well to my next question. Because those walls are so hard to break down, for parents or adults who want to bring up this conversation of suicide, whether they're talking about 13 Reasons Why or they're talking with a teen who they think might be considering it, do you have any advice on how to start that conversation? Because it is so difficult to bring up.
Yes, there's a couple different ways I would recommend. One is to, first and foremost, I guess, get in touch as a parent with how you feel about suicide. You never want to bring up this conversation without knowing how you feel about it. For instance, I think you alluded to it earlier, that you do not want to ask the question because you don't want to hear a certain answer and
Right.
say, for instance, your body language, okay, you're feeling depressed, I get it, but you're not suicidal, right? You could tell I'm completely closed off right now. I don't want to hear that answer.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? So you want to do a couple things. One is called normalization, and that is just throughout most people's life, parents included, they have known someone who has either been suicidal or committed suicide or had a family member who committed suicide. Say, you know, they were struggling with, this person was struggling with this certain time, or a lot of people your age do. I'm wondering if that's something you're experiencing as well. It's very normal. Or shame attenuation, which just means you're cueing in on something they feel shame about. And what that is if I said, you know, I'm wondering with all the pain and depression you've been feeling if you have had thoughts of suicide. And you're just there and you're open. And the person might say, well, yeah, I have. Mm-hmm. And then that opens the discussion to more specific stuff. But just normalizing it or kind of cueing in on what their experience is.
Which reminded me of a couple things. I love what you said, and I think that the willingness to be uncomfortable with the person, you know, to be there with them and to to sit with it and allow for them to not have the answers for you, for them to struggle with it, for them to say, well, why would you ask? And blah, 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 blah. You know, there's a lot of responses that you'll get, but to just sit there and be present and not be afraid of the answers. To sit there and to say, you know, a lot of times when people feel like, and especially, you know, Robert and I were talking earlier, you know, he's from the Navy, and I've worked with some military as well, and it's a really hard thing when you lose a part of your identity. You know, maybe it's that you didn't make the team. Maybe it's that there's a breakup. Maybe that the teen was trying out for the play and didn't get the part. Or maybe there's a video of the teen that's been passed around school now, and they just feel like it's never going to get better. And a lot of shame and guilt will keep them from talking, and also from you doing the hard work of sitting there in the uncomfortable silence and the uncomfortable situation of, well, you don't know anything I'm going through, you know, letting them vent some emotions, because there's usually a lot behind inside that they need to express, and that them expressing anything to you is progress as opposed to the alternative.
Yeah, I think it comes back to letting them know that you care, that you don't have to have all the answers. You just say, I care, and I'm going to try to get you some help. And there's a lot of other steps that you can take, you know, to try to de-escalate the situation and try to get the help available to them, and find out, you know, more how much planning has gone on, and all that kind of stuff helps you to know what steps to take next. But they're in desperate need of someone who is in better shape than they are. And you need to be that person, you know. You need to be the one who can say, okay, I don't know all the answers, but I know enough that I can help you. We can get help for you. And many times in a lot of suicide intervention classes, the idea is to try to, look, we know if you really plan to do it and you're committed to do it, someday you will kill yourself. Mm-hmm. But let's not make it today. Let's keep you safe for today, because there's lots of options that you may not have thought about. A lot of things that you just don't think there's any hope for the situation. But many, many times there are other people who've gone through similar situations, and we can learn from them. You know, we can figure out other ways, other options of getting around this problem. There's almost no problem that has no solution. We just have to find it. We haven't found it yet. So that type of saying, let's keep you safe and explore some other options, is a good way to go, I think.
That's all really great advice. Thank you. So this is our last question before we open it up to the audience. And we just talked about how adults can start this conversation with teens, but for a lot of our viewers who are watching 13 Reasons Why, and a lot of teens who are coming into the library here, they're talking about it amongst themselves, and they're not really inviting adults into the conversation. So do you have any advice for teens that are worried about a friend or want to bring up this conversation? It's kind of hard without having the authority of being an adult to start that conversation. So what would you tell them to do?
I think I would, if we're talking specifically about 13 Reasons Why, I think every parent should ask their children, young people, have you watched it? Have you seen it? Because they're going to be shocked. A vast majority of young people have seen it, I believe, from what I've been told. And most of the time, I think the parents don't even know that they've seen it. And the parents don't even know what it's really about. One of the other instructors for our QPR suicide intervention class has a 14-year-old daughter, and she asked her, she said, actually, a daughter came to her and said, Mom, I know you're interested in this stuff, you should watch this. Because she had already watched it. She said, well, let's watch it together. And so they did, and it gave them great opportunity to talk about, well, this isn't the way it's usually done, you know. There's a lot of other ways that things could happen from that point. It doesn't have to go down that same path. There is we have some here, but there's I think 10 talking points for parents who, when talking with the young people about 13 Reasons Why. It's put out by the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. And if you go to afsp.org, you can bring up those talking points for parents to use. So
I would say it's always tricky to put any kind of onus on a child or a teenager to, but I agree, it's really the onus is on the parents to initiate the conversation. And but if a friend is feeling, nervous about a friend or thinks there's something more, or they've said something concerning again, approach their parents, tell their parents, and then it's the adult's responsibility to then take action. If you're in the school setting, tell school personnel. Always tell an adult if you're really concerned. If the person isn't laughing and saying, "Oh, I got, too much homework tonight, I should just kill my," if it's something more, if there's something there and you feel it, it's a tangible that you can really feel it, tell an adult every time. That's my advice.
Yeah, I think it's so hard because they don't want to be the one who goes and tells on their friend. There's so much pressure to kind of like, I'm really upset about this. Maybe I should just end it. And then their peers going, do I say something about this? Do I not say something about this? And like he said, teens have to dial into their own senses, but a way that I try to live and how I try to empower youth to live is 10 years from now, what do you want to look back and say that you did? Because if this individual does have a problem and you didn't say something, how are you going to feel? And wouldn't you rather, excuse me, put forth the effort and maybe they're going to be mad at you, but it is better to be safe than sorry? And it's a really challenging time, I think, for teens and tweens because there's so much sensationalized everything. There's a lot of famous suicides going on all the time, and social media really blurs the lines of reality. But every time, it's better to seek out an adult, to tell somebody one way or the other, and you can afterwards say to your friend, listen, at the end of the day, I want you here, and I was willing to sacrifice you liking me right now for you being here tomorrow, because nobody can really refute that logic. And if you ask them, if it were me, wouldn't you want me to do the same? Most of the time they're going to say yes.
Yeah, a lot of times young people, before they'll talk, particularly to an adult, they say, well, I'll tell you what's going on, but you can't tell anybody. Yeah. And you should never make that promise. You should never make that promise. Your response should be something like, I really care about you and what happens to you, and I'm going to do whatever I have to do to make sure that you're okay, that I can help take care of you. I care that much about you. And I had a friend who taught some suicide intervention class. He said, I'd rather have somebody pissed off and really mad at me but alive than dead,
Yep.
And so if I have to do something that's going to make them mad to keep them alive, if it comes down to that, then I'll do that because I care that much about them. Yep. And same thing you're saying. I want them there. I want them around.